You know how arcade machines are rigged? Like when you get so close to winning that Pikachu plushie in the claw machine, but then it drops at the last second, forever dooming you to a lifetime of sorrow and mediocrity? Of course you know that feeling, we all do, but what I wanted to briefly discuss is how arcade fighting games are rigged. It's no secret that games like Street Fighter, Tekken, and Mortal Kombat, especially Mortal Kombat, like to read your inputs and make the AI perfectly duck that throw or anti-air that jump and kick. And once it happens to you, you can't unsee it. Desk has a great video about how the AI in Street Fighter 2 cheats and breaks the game, and I highly recommend it if you're interested. But, it's pretty obvious why arcade games are designed this way. It's because they want your money. After all, there's no permanent progress in these old school fighting games, so you'd have to keep putting money into the machine or else you'd have to start all over again. It's not like now, where arcade machines use cards and the internet to save your progress and allow you to transfer your data over to other machines. Once you eventually lost, you would have to walk away from the machine and start again another time from scratch. But one game, released by Capcom in the 90s, managed to achieve save data without using player cards or other forms of physical progress. Set in a high fantasy world with adventures featuring lion men, martial artists, ninjas, witch waifus, and a focus on single-player boss fights and traditional RPG mechanics, such as gaining experience points from fights to level up, learning new moves and developing elemental resistances, Capcom created something very interesting and out of the box with their 1996 RPG fighting game, Red Earth. The game's story depends on which of the 4 characters you choose to play as, but the general backdrop is that Red Earth takes place in a world that the English version says is set in the 14th century, but the Japanese version says it's set in 1999, so pick the one that works for you. But whatever time period this game takes place in, its world never had any technological revolutions, so the people and geography are very medieval. An evil wizard who wishes to destroy and then resurrect humanity known as Scion forms his own country and sends deadly monsters all over the globe to carry out his plans, but 4 heroes aim to stop him. There's Leo, the king of Sevalia who has been cursed to live as a man-lion hybrid, Kenji, head of the Oniwa Banshu who was sent to investigate and neutralize the onslaught of monsters by his shogun, Tessa, a witch who studies how magic can be used for science, and finally, Mai Ling, a talented young martial artist who is on a quest to find the person responsible for the destruction of her village. These characters all look and play different, and it seems to me that the artists at Capcom put a lot of work into making sure all 4 of them stood out from each other. While Tessa might use her ice magic and bird to attack enemies from long range, Leo might get up close and go crazy with his sword, whereas Kenji might use his projectiles and Tatsu to strike the enemy multiple times. While the main characters are visually appealing and contain extremely different movesets, the true stars of the show are the bosses. Red Earth's campaign mode is essentially a boss rush with awesome cutscenes in between, but when you finally make it to a fight, it's incredible. There's Hauser, a T-Rex fossil that has been brought back to life, Kongo, an Oni with a giant kanabo, Hydron, a squid monster, and Levia, a harpy who has been corrupted by Scion, just to name a few. Each boss has their own moves and strategy for beating them, but the thing that unites them all, especially the bosses found towards the end of the game, is that they're all challenging. Remember the intro where I mentioned arcade games being rigged? This is kind of what I was talking about. I wouldn't go as far as to say the game cheats to make you lose, but there definitely is a big difficulty spike after the halfway point. The bosses also regain part of their life bar when you lose and continue, so I suppose that the game is trying to place you in a disadvantageous position in that regard. For my first playthrough, I went through as Kenji, and learning about how his entire ninja clan is out to betray and kill him was, I must admit, very engaging, especially for an arcade game. I genuinely wanted to see the next cutscene and boss fight that the Shogun would try and use to take out Kenji, and see how he responds to all the chaos around him. I didn't know this while playing, but according to the game's Wikipedia page, it also features multiple endings and hidden endings influenced by the player's actions, given choices, amount of continues used, and the manner of killing enemies. These all sound simple enough, but the given choices part is something I still haven't explained. Using Kenji as an example, when you defeat the final boss, Kenji's subordinate asks him if he wants to trust the report about all the monsters that has been created by his superiors. If you pick yes, Kenji overhears the conversation between the Shogun and the subordinate, confirming his suspicions that they plan on betraying him, and he kills them to prevent this from happening, dooming him to a lifetime of shame as he has acted against his code of honor. However, if you pick no, Kenji has a meeting with the Shogun, goes out to fight more monsters, and then it's explained that Kenji is aware of what is planned against him, but accepts his eventual death as it means he will go down with honor. If you were to continue over 20 times, Kenji doesn't get a decision to make. Instead, the game continues automatically into the final cutscene, where Kenji expresses some regret over doing his evil lord's bidding. The multiple choice endings also apply to the other characters in the game, and if I were to describe them all, we'd be here all week. But the point is, for an arcade game, this has a surprising amount of narrative focus and twists and turns to keep you engaged all the way to the end. But what if you go down and you don't have any more money to put into the machine? That's where my next point comes in. If one of the game's bosses has defeated you in battle and you can't continue playing, the game gives you a password. This password can be entered on the character select screen, and it allows you to keep all your experience, stats, and new moves you've learned over the course of gameplay. Say you like playing as Leo and know your password because you wrote it down. If you find another machine, you can punch in that password to continue where you left off and get even more experience. This is an awesome system to introduce a form of save data into arcade games. Gone are the days of having to try everything again from the beginning. Now, you can keep your poison resistance wherever you went. Speaking of poison resistance, the game has lots of RPG mechanics featured. As you level up from defeating enemies and completing bonus stages, you gain experience points in the form of these colorful crystals. When you level up after a stage, you are informed of the level you have reached and the new abilities you've gained as a result. The game is balanced around this system, as the enemies get harder the more you play, forcing you to grind to beat them by constantly leveling up, quite like a JRPG. Every character starts at level 1 and can grind their way to the highest level ever found in an RPG game. Level 32. If you're playing the game in the Capcom Fighting Collection, like I did, you can go into the settings and change it to automatically level up every character in the game to level 32, but I decided to play the game the normal way, by starting out from level 1. The bosses also gain more health depending on your level. If you start out at level 1, they'll only have 1 bar of health, but the more you level up, the more life they're assigned, keeping both the player and the AI enemies on an even playing field. The password and experience point systems complement the actual gameplay nicely, which we'll get into now. Red Earth has the same button layout as other Capcom fighters, like Street Fighter or Marvel vs. Capcom. You have 3 punches and 3 kicks for a total of 6 attacks. Instead of having a super meter, characters can collect special orbs that allow them to do supers. You can do a super if you have at least one of these orbs, and they do pretty good damage, so make sure not to miss or else it'll be wasted. There are other mechanics that are unique to Red Earth, such as the Ultimate Guard, which is performed by inputting Heavy Punch and Heavy Kick at the same time, which lets you block without taking any chip damage, and the Ultimate Counter, which only Kenji and Leo can do by inputting this quarter cycle down motion with a punch or kick to fire back with a counter after blocking the enemy's attack. The game also feels very different to Street Fighter. It's a bit hard to put into words, as the best way to experience it is to play the game for yourself, but I'll try my best to describe it. You know how in Street Fighter you can special cancel attacks by doing them after a normal move, like low forward into Hadouken? Well, special cancelling isn't a thing in Red Earth. You're either doing a normal, special, or super on its own. This takes some getting used to, as it was very different when compared to the boatloads of Street Fighter games Capcom was releasing at the time. Another major difference that set Red Earth apart from other Capcom games was the graphics. Running on the CPS-3, Capcom's brand new arcade board at the time, Red Earth was the very first game to use this board, and it was the last board that was wholly developed by Capcom, as they then went on to use the Naomi board, which was developed by Sega. The CPS-3 also powered games such as Street Fighter III and JoJo's Bizarre Adventure: Heritage for the Future, which is why all these games kind of look the same. When compared to games that ran on the CPS-2 hardware, Red Earth has a noticeable improvement in graphics, and this is because the CPS-3 provided Capcom's arcade games with brand new state-of-the-art visuals. You might have noticed by now, but this game has incredibly detailed sprite work with fluid animation and it's pure eye candy. The CPS-3 hardware has roughly 4 times the power of the CPS-2 board, and it can display up to 32,768 colors on screen at a single time, which ensures the game will look awesome no matter what's happening. Both the characters and backgrounds are filled with an expert level of attention to detail, and in my opinion, this is one of the best looking arcade games Capcom ever put out. I made this video to help some of you recognize a forgotten Capcom arcade game with a focus on the single player experience. While this may sound odd for an arcade game, Capcom pulled it off with a memorable cast of characters, fun gameplay, awesome boss fights, beautiful graphics, and a stunning soundtrack. You can play Red Earth quite easily on Fightcade or on the Capcom Fighting Collection, which is the first ever official port of the game. It's taken 26 years, but Red Earth has finally made it onto home consoles. While the game never received a sequel, it did manage to sneak its way into Street Fighter V, with Leo being a DLC costume, and the game also found representation in Tekken, with some sweet looking artwork. All in all, I highly recommend you try out Red Earth if you get the chance, as I can guarantee it's unlike any other arcade game you've played before. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.